So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Simona Sankalaite. I'm a PhD student at KU Leuven. And today I would like to present a systematic review focused on interventions that aim to improve children's executive function and self-regulation by manipulating teacher-student interaction. So, as many of you already know, it is well documented that executive functions and self-regulation are essential in a number of domains, but are particularly important for academic achievement. And the EF-SR skills are associated with better school adjustment, as seen in measures of academic ability and also teachers' perceptions for readiness for learning. And numerous studies consistently show that the EF and SR skills rapidly develop in preschool and continue to develop throughout childhood, with some domains even continuing to mature throughout adolescence and early adulthood. However, in general, EF and SR fail to develop to their full potential if the contextual stimulation is not adequately presented. Therefore, basically the focus has shifted a little bit in the recent years. So given the importance of EF and SR to children's academic outcomes and children's social and emotional development, there have been numerous attempts to improve these skills in preschool and primary school children. And the research suggests a number of diverse practices and programs for improving children's EF and SR. And generally, findings indicate that children with initially poorest executive function and self-regulation skills show the most improvement from any of this intervention. It is important to note that the majority of studies directly and exclusively targeted EF-SR stimulation fail to report durable effects. Some training programs lack transferable results. For instance, training one EF component does not result in improving other cognitive components, and results fail to generalize to real-world behaviors. Other interventions produce short-term training-specific effects that, again, do not generalize to real-world behaviors. Therefore, this lack of transferable and durable effects might be attributed to such interventions teaching these specific skills out of context and ignoring potentially important contextual factors. Okay, has it changed? Oh, there's some delay a little bit in my screen. It is. Sorry, I feel like there's some lag. Can you still see me and hear me? There's some pop-ups happening on my screen.
Yeah, we can see you and we can see the introduction slide.
Oh, still being. Okay. Yeah, but that is fine. Okay, I feel like there was some lag. I'm sorry. Well, within this line of research, most studies have focused on the parent-child interaction mostly and home setting, and shown that positive interactions can support and promote the quality of executive function and self-regulation. And in order to add to the parenting effect, more recently, researchers shifted their attention to school and classroom environment, and specifically to teachers' role in promoting these cognitive skills. Children interact with teachers on the classroom level, so-called teacher-student interaction, and on the dyadic level, so-called teacher-student relationship. Regarding relationships between teacher and student at the classroom level, an important contribution was made by Hamre and Pianta, who introduced the teaching through interactions framework. And this framework places teacher-student interactions as a cornerstone for student learning. This proposed framework organizes TSI into 3 domains, so namely emotional support, instructional support, and classroom organization. And numerous observational studies have shown a correlation between the quality of TSI and children's EF-SR skills. Despite the importance of TSI on EFSR performance, there is evidence that the benefits of a high quality TSI at the classroom level are conditional on children's individual relationships with their teachers. So regarding the relationships at the dyadic level, so individual level, attachment theory is most commonly referred to. And here the focus lies on the affective components of the relationship between teacher and specific students. So more specifically, closeness, conflict, and dependency. And this interest for TSR at the individual level emerged rather recently. However, it consistently indicates that a positive TSR and generally effective teacher behaviors are longitudinally associated with improved child's EFSR abilities. Also more engagement, also more profit from instruction, and so on. So even though previous studies already provide some indications on the role of TSI and TSR in the development of executive function and self-regulation, they are correlational in nature, and the causality question remains unanswered. So based on some gaps in the current research, the purpose of the current study was to provide an overview of the existing research on specifically on the interventions focusing on primary and preschool and primary school children's EF and SR performance with or without direct manipulation of TSI or TSR. Therefore, this systematic review aimed to assess whether school or class-wide interventions are effective and whether it depends on the type of manipulation, so dyadic versus classroom level, and also components being activated. So for instance, instructional versus emotional support. And also to compare and contrast the effects of these interventions on executive function and self-regulation and their distinct components. So we have applied a multi-model method search strategy to collect all peer-reviewed articles that are out there using 3 techniques. So searches in databases using various combinations of our key terms, forward and backward citation searching, and also checking grade literature for some unpublished or ongoing work. Basically, the selected studies had to include the preschool or primary school children, which generally corresponds to 3 to 12 years of age. They also, of course, had to include a measure of executive function or self-regulation, either pre and post-intervention or post-intervention measure for both experimental and control group. And also included studies had to incorporate an intervention in per study, either focusing on improving TSI, TSR, and as an effect EFSR, or directly improving EFSR. And basically, we also aimed for studies to be randomized controlled trials, or then at least applying a quasi-experimental design, or then if there's no control group, at least participants were assessed pre and post intervention. So the searches across all databases resulted in 2,800 unique articles. But after screening at the abstract and full text level, the database search resulted in the inclusion of 12 original studies. These were then used for backward and forward search, which resulted in additional 6 articles. And inquiries in grade literature for ongoing or unpublished work did not result in any additional studies. So of all the articles, 18 met the inclusion criteria and were reviewed. This is just an overview of the study characteristics of the included studies. I would just like to mention that all the included studies involved a manipulation of TSI and none of TSR. And 14 studies primarily focused on improving TSI as a primary outcome, and in turn, children's consequent EF-SR as a secondary outcome. And 4 studies focused on improving EF-SR outcome variables by providing teachers with some TSI strategies to be implemented in their teaching. Given the title and the focus of the study, all interventions can be broadly classified into 2 types. So the ones focusing on improving EF and their components, and those on improving self-regulation. So this is part of the results. In sum, the effect of instructional support on working memory ranged from no to positive effect. However, the positive effect was found in a very small sample study. It was only 4 students included. So the result should be interpreted carefully. Teachers' emotional support positively affected children's working memory. However, only in children considered most vulnerable. So this was with children with poor parent-child relationship, for instance. Then for the instructional support on inhibitory control, it also ranged from no to a small positive effect. And finally, there was a small effect of instructional support on cognitive flexibility, but there was only 1 study that's targeted this EF subcomponent. So for the self-regulation, all 3 types of TSI showed a small positive effect on children's overall self-regulation performance, with this effect being strongest in children scoring the lowest at baseline. So again, considered those most vulnerable. And findings from 1 study indicate a small positive effect of classroom organization on children's attention regulation. For emotional regulation, teachers' instructional support did not result in an effect on children's performance. Teachers' classroom organization led to a small positive effect, which was again largest for the children at initial risk. Regarding behavioral regulation, teachers' emotional support ranged from no to a small indirect positive effect. This effect was found by teachers' emotional support improving teacher-student relationship, and in turn, children's behavior regulation. And the teachers' classroom organization did not result in any effect on children's behavior regulation. And finally, teachers' instructional support led to a small-sized effect in children at risk for emotional and behavioral disorders. So the first goal of this review was to assess the causal effect of TSI, TSR interventions on executive function, self-regulation, of EF-SR interventions with also an added manipulation of TSI. And even though all 3 types of TSI support seem to improve executive function and self-regulation in children, some differences are evident, obviously. So, for instance, emotional support only showed, at most a small effect, but it was also the type of support that was least extensively studied. Instructional support was most commonly used. It was, I think, 9 studies and showed somewhat consistently a small positive effect of teacher support on children's EF-SR outcomes. Organizational support appeared to be most promising, although results are quite dispersed, ranging from no to a large positive effect. And only 1 study from those reviewed has employed 2 types of support in their intervention and reported no effect. So direct comparison was not possible. And like I mentioned before, somewhat surprisingly, no study manipulated TSR at the dyadic level. And out of all included, only 2 studies assessed teacher-student relationship and showed, like mentioned before, that improving TSI led to a higher quality of TSR, and then in turn in gains in children's EF-SR performance. However, based on previous research, this relationship between TSI and TSR is more likely to work in an opposite direction. So improving TSR on the dyadic level will lead to improved TSI on the classroom level. The second research goal was to compare and contrast the effects of these interventions for EF and SR and their distinct components. And in some, all targeted EF and SR components are potentially trainable and by these interventions by manipulating TSI. Self-regulation when compared to executive function seemed to be affected more strongly. However, again, more studies targeted self-regulation, so therefore might have led to somewhat inflated result. And regarding distinct subcomponents, no component appears to be most positively affected. And as I mentioned before, the strongest intervention effects were found for children who were considered vulnerable or disadvantaged. So these children included children from low socioeconomic backgrounds, children with poor parent-child relationships, and children with initially weakest EFSI skills. And these results are consistent with the literature of direct executive function self-regulation interventions, showing the highest gains for these groups. So overall, the current study provided an overview of research examining the causal effect between TSI and children's EFSR performance and show a positive effect of such interventions. So these findings indicate that teachers can effectively promote these important cognitive processes in children. And it further concludes that manipulating TSI is particularly important and beneficial for children considered vulnerable, suggesting that these cognitive deficits can be minimized if children are stimulated appropriately. However, due to high heterogeneity in concepts and operationalization and the relatively small overall number of studies included, it was not possible to effectively compare the level of interaction, so TSI versus the TSR, types of support, for instance, instructional support versus classroom organization, and also different child characteristics like age and gender, through the means of meta-regression. So what the current review highlights is that further research is needed to examine which specific teacher behaviors are important for which specific executive function and self-regulation subcomponents, and whether this is influenced by child, teacher, and maybe parent and family characteristics. Such insights can then further instruct the development and implementation of effective interventions in education. So that is the end of my presentation. Thank you all for your attention. I hope I didn't go much over scheduled time.
2 years ago already, in March 2020, schools closed suddenly, primary and secondary schools. But after a while, the primary schools reopened. But actually, for the 3 months after, secondary schools did not fully open until August next year, actually. And that could have, that had consequences. Students adolescents had to be homeschooled. So there was less direct support from teachers and less direct support from peers, which could be really important in their situation. And it also said that it gives a more importance to the home environment. So the home environment became more important. Well, already right after the school closures, where there were a few investigations were done. First, investigations focused on health. And they found that there were higher rates of anxiety and depression during that first period. There were also some investigations on motivation. They found out that there was a decrease in motivation and that anxiety played a role, that more anxious students had a higher decrease in motivation. And also in 2020, Bol investigated parental support, and he found that if there's less parental support, then there's lower academic motivation. Although that's a quote like Crystal from our department, who found that out, that parental support is really important. So these investigations were done in the first few months after the schools closed. We also did an investigation on school burnout and autonomous motivation, because those are really important for academic success. That's why we decided to investigate these. And beside that, these were already investigated before the school closures, because this was part of a larger diary study, which started in February 2020, when there was not much. We heard about COVID at that moment, but there wasn't a lot of stress in the Netherlands about the virus and the consequences it would have at that moment. So that gave us an opportunity to not only focus on school burnout and autonomous motivation, but to control for the previous measurements. And we did not only want to know whether some factors predicted the decrease, but are there actually predictors that could be protective? Could, for example, mindset, self-efficacy, affect, parental support, and parent-child interaction be protective factors for the increase or decrease or the change in school burnout and autonomous motivation? So we investigated school burnout, and school burnout measures a few different things. For example, it consists of exhaustion. For example, students can feel overwhelmed about the work they have to do. It's about cynicism, that they feel they're losing their interest in school. And it's also about their sense of academic inadequacy, which means that they might have higher expectations before than they have right now. So these three things make up school burnout. And we also measured autonomous motivation, which comes from the academic self-regulation scale. And these two are the most autonomous forms of motivation, in which intrinsic motivation means that adolescents find it fun to learn stuff, and identified motivation is more that they want to learn more stuff. For the predictors, we had self-efficacy, which means that adolescents should be able to view their capabilities. Higher self-efficacy means you're very well able to view your own abilities. We also investigated mindset, which is on a scale from fixed to growth, in which a fixed mindset means you think you cannot really change your intelligence, for example, while a growth mindset means more that you think that intelligence is changeable or malleable, and that if you practice, you can actually become better. We also focused on affect, which is positive and negative emotions. And another predictor was parental support. And in our investigation, parental support meant that parents, on one hand, displayed leadership and also show unconditional acceptance. So they accept their children. So they're leaders, they have rules, they also accept. And we also focused on parent-child interaction. Was there more or less interaction when the children were at home? And was this interaction more positive or negative? And we focused on the positive and negative part. And self-efficacy and mindset we measured before school closures, while affect parental support and parent-child interaction, we think are more at a certain level, at a certain moment. So we measured them after the school closures. Okay, then we had a total of 76 adolescents and one of their parents. So this was part of the diary study, and both adolescents and parents had to participate. What we see over here is that there are more girls than boys participated, and that more mothers than fathers participated. And that the parental level of education, these were mostly highly educated women. You could say HBO and university. Most of them had HBO or university. Then this is an overview of the measurements. We measured autonomous motivation and school burnout both before and after in the first 3 weeks of the school closures. So it was after 3 weeks of the school closures we measured these. We saw a significant decrease already in autonomous motivation. You can see a slight increase in school burnout, however, that is not significant. So at that moment, there was no significant increase in school burnout. We measured mindset and self-efficacy before the school closed, and positive and negative effects and parental support and frequency of positive interaction we measured after those 3 weeks. And in this case, A means we measured it within the adolescents. They reported it, the measurement was taken by the adolescents, and the frequency of positive interaction was measured by the parent. I'm gonna take a sip of water. Okay, how did we analyze these? We did 2 stepwise regression analysis. First, we had the intrapersonal predictors. And with those predictors, we mean mindset, self-efficacy, positive effect, and negative effect. These were all measured in the adolescent. So these were the adolescent factors, actually. And we also measured, and in the second models, we measured parental predictors, parental support, and the parent-child interaction were in the second 2 models. So now I'm going to show you 4 graphs with results. So you're a little bit prepared. We did 2 stepwise regressions, and we had step 1 and step 2. We will not, for just clarification purposes, I will only show you the second model. So in this case, we have the school burnout is here the dependent variable, and we have the intrapersonal predictors as the predictors. And what we can see is that gender is significant. In this case, it means that more girls have a higher score on burnout than boys have. That's one thing. We can also see that school burnout before relates to school burnout after the school closures. But more important, and that's what I would like to focus on, is in this case, self-efficacy. It's the last 3 columns, which is self-efficacy, positive and negative effect. And what we see on the y-axis is the beta values, just so you know. So I didn't want to present the tables. I'm presenting the beta values in graphs to hope that to visualize this and to hope that it makes it more clear. Now what we see is that self-efficacy and negative emotions, before the last column, the 2 before the last column, they negatively predict school burnout. It means that those with a low self-efficacy and a low positive effect have higher school burnout when controlled for the situation before the school closure. We see that a high negative effect really predicts a high school burnout, also controlled for the situation before. So self-efficacy and positive and negative effects seem to be important for school burnout. In the Second results, this is not about the school burnout. Now it's about the autonomous motivation, same type of graph, of course. And we can see that autonomous motivation before is related to autonomous motivation after the school closures. But importantly over here, it's that mindset and positive effects play a role. So having a growth mindset, because a higher value means having more growth mindset, means that there's more autonomous motivation when controlled to the situation before. So it seems in this case that mindset and also positive effects could be protective for the decrease in autonomous motivation. So these were the two results we had for the intrapersonal adolescent factors. This is the model for school burnout again, but this time we took a look at the parental factors. So parental support and positivity of interaction. What we find out over here is again, school burnout before, of course, relates to school burnout after. But parental support is negatively related to school burnout. Because adolescents with a high parental support have lower levels of school burnout when compared to the situation before the school closures, of course. We could not find any significant effects on positivity of interaction. So not necessarily the interaction at that moment seems to be important, but the support adolescents perceive seems to be protective in this case. And actually, we see the same results for autonomous motivation. And in this case, it's of course a positive effect. And that means that perceiving parental support means that there's more autonomous motivation compared to the situation before the school closures. So in a summary, for school burnout, it seems that positive and negative effect is a positive predictor for school burnout, and self-efficacy and positive effect are negative predictors. And and parental support is a negative predictor as well. So having a high self-efficacy, positive effect, positive emotions, and high parental support leads to lower levels of school burnout compared to the situation before. And for autonomous motivation, the positive predictors are mindset, positive effect, and parental support. So having a growth mindset, having positive emotions, and feeling that you're supported by your parents lead all to a higher autonomous motivation controlled for the situation before. So what does this mean? What do our results show? It shows that adolescent factors, predictors, are important. Mindset, self-efficacy, and effect can be protective for the change in autonomous motivation and school burnout. It also means that the home environment is really important, as this already has been shown by other researchers as well. And not necessarily the actual interaction is important, but how well adolescents perceive the support by the parents seems to be more important than the actual interaction. So even though it seems at this moment that Corona is on its return, we never know what will happen in autumn. And how could this report diminish negative outcomes during maybe future home-based learning periods? We never know in what situation we will come. What could be important is that we monitor adolescents' effects, that it's really important during such periods to monitor how their feelings and to make sure that we can actually do something if they might have real negative emotions. We could also focus on improvements of self-efficacy and encourage a growth mindset of adolescents with lesson programs in schools, since these could be protective for a change in autonomous motivation and for an increase in school burnout. It could be important to focus on these two factors in schools. And what we could do is, what could be done is keep track of parental support and also inform parents about the importance of this support. this investigation, as with other investigations, shows that parental support is really important. I think it's also important to make sure that parents know that how well they support the children is of great influence. I think in adolescence, parents might sometimes have the idea that they don't have any influence, but many investigations show that they do have an influence. And these three things could, for example, lead to adolescents not knowing how to deal with school closures and independently, having to work independently, to more adolescents who know how to deal with such situations. So I might have done this really quickly. I think it's better for my voice. Thanks for listening to the speech. Thanks.